Welcome to Yelling Into the Void, a podcast discussing and exploring topics in World of Warcraft. I'm Tevin. Scott's here with me as always. And Scott, in just a couple weeks from now, well, I guess 1 week from now, technically, we'll be storming down the streets of the Undermine and breaching the casino of Gallywix. And I'm just hopeful that there's riches to be had there.
Well, I mean, let's be clear here. In a week from now, we're going to hang outside the casino waiting to be let in because the actual raid won't be out until 2 weeks. But yeah, we are, by the time this episode comes out, it will be less than a week to patch 11.1. And you need to buy some WoW tokens now if you need some gold because they're about to plummet in value.
Yeah, I'm for one am pretty broke right now. I also think that you're underestimating the fact that we're going to be just standing around hanging out outside the casino, because I don't know about you, but I'm going to be driving my car all around the streets of Undermine.
Is that going to be like the new thing? Instead of like just flying mindlessly around the Dragon Isles, we're just going to be doing donuts and Undermine just for hours?
I don't know. I guess we're gonna have to find out. It depends on how fun the system is. But Scott, there is, I guess, a calm before the storm coming. So a couple things that comes with that. There are some recent changes that have came through for tanks, which is like far and away one of the biggest things people have been complaining about. So we'll cover that. And then a couple of other things that I wanted to cover today. To be completely transparent with everybody listening, I don't know how long today's episode is going to be, because this is like I said, it quite literally the calm before the storm. There is not much to be said. There's nothing new. And really, some of the things that we're going to talk about here are just one-off articles that I've read or we've read or seen on Wowhead. And that's about it. So
I'm hoping for a cool 20 minutes and then we'll wrap this thing up.
I hope it's a little longer than that. But I read an article. The reason I wanted to go on that tirade before I said
Can that just be the title of this episode, is I read an article?
I read an article. Yeah. I'll do that. But I read an article about heirlooms and them potentially being outdated. And I thought it was interesting because I haven't really thought about it. Like, I have had every class at max level for I don't know how long now, or at least to a level at which heirlooms doesn't benefit them anymore. Mm-hmm. And it's not really a system I thought about, but people who are still leveling characters and people who have recently leveled characters through like time walking, it really is a system that I wonder if they do need to take a second look at. So we can talk a little bit more about that later. You got any initial thoughts on that though?
I think the heirloom system is stupid, and I came back to the game not knowing what it was, and then read about what it was and how it had changed since I played the game, and I was like, this is dumb. This is dumb. It doesn't give me bonus experience anymore. What the fuck's the point? And that's how I still feel. But it's dude, leveling is so easy in this game now.
Yeah.
Is it even necessary to have this thing anymore?
Well, we'll find out here in a few minutes when we start talking about heirlooms. There has been data mined weak oral-like Lua files for a buff tracker. This is news. I don't even know if this is new for this week, but it was something that I was scrolling through Wowhead and it caught my eye, and I started reading through it, and it brought up a couple questions that I had around stuff like this. So I want to take some time to talk about that too. And then I guess the last thing to really touch on here is kind of a retrospective look at the Cersei Circlet, because we said we were going to do that, and I think it's worthwhile. So
sure.
But yeah, other than that, I think that covers like the four main-ish things I want to talk about today. Is there anything else that you've got to add to this, Scott?
No, I mean, the only thing I just wanted to put out there, because we kind of closed the circle, is the grand finals of the TGP happened last weekend. Mandatory, shocking the world one-handedly. It was not particularly close. I think this is really interesting. This is the least I've ever been interested in a TGP, and it also seemed like the least popular TGP has ever been. We talked about that a little last week, but the finals really didn't change anything in that regard. The only thing I will say is the finals went back to the old weekend method of this. Yeah, 6 teams, 6 dungeons, 3 unlocking first day, then 2, then 1. So it was the old TGP we've seen. So that was the final. So there's definitely still was some strategy in the finals. But yeah, just like I don't know. I don't know what it is about this one that just interested me so little. Maybe it's the timing in the season. Maybe it's the fact that most of the players that I really get excited to see weren't playing, or maybe it's just the fact that like nothing crazy happened in these dungeons. There was no like new crazy route that we had never seen before. No insane tech that allowed them to do a dungeon that had never been done before. It was just mostly the keys that they look like on live, but within a certain amount of time, and that was about it.
Yeah, so my thoughts on this are that the season coming to an end a week after grand finals airs is really the driving factor to why this is such a bummer of a TGP. Um, I mean, I know a decent amount of my friends and guildmates have long since quit this season and are waiting for the next season to come back.
Yeah,
And so nobody's really got eyes on the game right now. And so nobody's really watching. When we had MDI, there were still a few people playing the game, not very many, but we at least had interaction around that. And I don't think that there's anything more telling than the fact that like when we have MDI or we have TGP in the past, Wowhead like takes specific runs and like does a breakdown on them, like contracts Stratnos or contracts Nagura to do like a breakdown of the run.
yeah,
We didn't have anything for that this time around.
yeah.
So I think
Not
that
worth
really
the
just
time.
like, yeah, I think that backs up what you were saying 100%.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I don't know. I think it's just true that TGP and MDR are the type of like if you are not playing retail, you are not watching those things. Like I think the in retail is a game that if you're playing retail, you're probably watching people play retail. But I think if you quit retail, you're probably not like it's like I think a lot of people watch classic, right? Like especially this OnlyFans stuff. A lot of people that do not play World of Warcraft are watching the OnlyFans hardcore classic stuff. I think that's just true. I think with retail, on the other hand, though, I don't think you watch this game if you're not playing this game. And I think
Right.
that the exception to that might be the race to the world first. That might be the one exception to that rule. But I think
Hmm.
any kind of competitions with like Arena or Mythic Plus, if you're not playing the game, you're not going to watch those things. And I think that's definitely what we saw because I don't think a lot of people are playing the game right now.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. Well, Scott, let's just dive into main stuff today and start off with probably the biggest thing that we have to talk about, which is there were very significant tank damage buffs across the board. I think every tank getting 20% damage increase on all spells and abilities besides Brewmaster, who got 15%,
Haha,
which,
suck it, Brewmaster.
to be honest, Brewmaster has always been a tank that deals an insane, crazy, stupid amount of damage.
Yes.
So
Yes.
they just
Yes.
don't have the survivability to back it up half the time. But I think that this is one of the two areas at which people were really complaining and about tanks recently. Like they do no damage, and up until a couple weeks ago, they had huge amounts of threat issues.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that they've really kind of addressed two of the major concerns that tank players or key people have in general. I do wonder. It's going to be interesting to see how this season plays out as people who main tank start to play with it, because I think that there's going to be significantly less for tanks to be responsible for in this season than there was in season one, which could cause like I don't know a feeling of like you lost something or something like that. I don't know. It'll be interesting to see how it plays out.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, I think definitely the damage buffs were needed and good. I think tanks like when they do damage, and they should get to do more damage. So good job. Um, I don't know. I don't know how this is going to actually end up working out. Like I just we're in a big what if period right now on what the season is going to actually look like. By the way, I think related to this, one of the changes that happened last week at the beginning of the week was a 10% nerf in all enemy hit points across all dungeons in Mythic Plus. So there was a global reduction of by 10% of HP in Keystones. So what that does is it means that at the highest level, it's now easier to time on damage because everything has less health. It dies faster, right? what it means is it kind of starts to push us into a situation like we've seen in the past few seasons, where timing the key is not the hard part. It's surviving the damage, the hard part. And this is only at the top end, only at the top end, right? For people that are not playing at the bleeding edge, this is basically just a nerf because everything's just going to die faster and you're not going to notice it. But when you start pushing, like when you're talking about which key could we possibly do when you're at that bleeding edge of like, what is the highest we could possibly push this dungeon, a 10% nerf in hit points basically guarantees that the timer is not going to be the thing that prevents you from getting to that next key level. It is whether or not you can survive some damage. So how that ends up ultimately affecting tanks, I'm not sure, but and it'll damn well affect healers. That's for sure.
Yeah, the 10% nerf to enemy health across the board, plus the 20% damage to tank increase. Like, these on top of each other are just going to make killing things feel significantly easier, especially in the like 1 to 10 or I guess 2 to 10 range of keys. Um, Obviously, you're not going to know if you weren't playing on PTR what it was before, but in theory, your twos or let's just say tens going into season 2, your bosses should not be in the realm of like, 2.5 ish minutes or whatever it is. They'll be probably closer to 2 ish minutes. So you'll have a fairly decent drop in the amount of time spent fighting bosses or time spent fighting difficult trash
Yeah.
packs, I think.
Which I think at the the level of up to 10 keys, I think is nothing but good. But I do wonder how that will ultimately affect like the top end key. I think it's really interesting to think about. Like, do you think getting tens done this season is going to end up being like comparable to season 3 of Dragonflight? How easy it was to time 20s to fill your vault. I think it might, because with the nerf and scaling and all the changes they've done, and now the nerf and global damage and the like, I just feel like things are going to die very very quickly in a 10, and it's going to be pretty relatively easy to get them done.
Yeah, I mean, on paper, right? Like, I haven't done any of the PTR. On
Yeah,
paper, yeah,
famous
I
last
want
words, and then
to.
3 weeks I'll be like, fuck.
Yeah, on paper, I want to agree with you, and then we're gonna fight a boss that has like insane ramping damage, like 90% of the fight, and we're gonna be struggling to survive.
Mm-hmm.
So, but yeah, no. On paper, I definitely think that that's kind of what we're gonna be looking at. It's gonna be easy to get to the point where you can get gear out of your vault, and going past that, it might be easy for another 5 or so key levels, and then it'll really start to pick up in difficulty. You'll hit the point where things are going to really test your healer. They're going to really test your ability to use defensives correctly, CC correctly. But yeah, I definitely think that we're looking like we're going to be more in a situation of Dragonflight Season 3 than we're going to be in a situation of War Within Season 1.
I hope so. I think that'll be good for the health of the game, and I think people will be happier. But yeah, we'll see. I look forward to trying to push a little bit more than I did this season. I think I'm going to end the season on like the lowest score I've had in a long time, actually. And that's for many reasons, but I'm looking forward to trying to push that up again next season, especially since I got a new shiny reward to go for.
I guess you want to talk about that a little bit, how we were somewhat wrong, somewhat right last week when we were talking about the mount rewards.
Yeah, I didn't actually like bother to look at what the actual reward was, and I just made an assumption, and it turns out my assumption was wrong. But I think we said specifically last week that the reward for Keystone Legend, the mount you get for 3K score, is a unique mount. It's not. It's just a recolor of the KSM mount. So the mount you get for 200 score and the mount you get for 2,000 score and the mount you get for 3,000 score are the same mount, just recolored. Which is like my initial reaction was, drag. But then I was like, but it's a different mount than we got in season 1. So at least they're doing that. Like I guess that's like if the compromise is each season the KSM/KSL mount is a brand new mount and not just a recolor of the previous season's mount, but we have to have 2 mounts within the same track within the season be recolors. I guess that's a fair compromise. I guess
Right.
I will be okay with that ultimately.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I don't know. I want to see where we go from here. Really, like if this is a compromise that we have to make also to potentially get like gear sets for high pushing Mythic Plus score or something like that, then that's fine too. But all of this to say, we are increasing the amount of rewards we're getting. The rewards are unique to that season, at least it seems like so far. Um, and I like that. I like that it is unique to the season, not unique to the expansion.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
Especially when they give you this brand new thing called dragon riding and then say, fuck you, Mythic Plus players, have a ground mount.
I still can't believe they did that for 4 seasons. Like, it's absolutely insane to me that at no point in that development process anyone was like, "Hey, maybe we should give them a dragon in the dragon expansion." No,
No,
huh?
the
No.
only way to get a dragon was to raid or to arenas. You can't get it from Mythic Plus. No dragons to be had there.
Just incredible. Just absolutely incredible.
But I guess the last thing to talk about for Mythic Plus, Scott, is initially balance is looking okay, I guess is the best way to put it. I
Yeah.
think that there are some outliers. There are some things that are looking relatively strong. Thinking like Paladin and Demon Hunter in the tank slot,
Mm-hmm.
Monk in the healer. I think Disc Priest also in the healer slot.
Yeah. Dispriest for sure. For sure.
And then there's crazy DPS. I think BM Hunter is far and away one of the best DPS right now. I think 2 of the mage specs are pretty decent. I think Fire and Frost are both very good. And I think Shamans are still having a heyday, enhancement specifically.
Well, I mean, I think with a couple of exceptions being like huge class reworks, there's just not going to be a huge amount of change coming into 11.1, right? Like if a class got reworked, you're going to see some changes there, but mostly like the tanks, for example, I think is a perfect thing because they're essentially playing exactly like they're playing on live right now in the new patch. Like there's some nerfs and buffs for some various specs and hero talents and things like that. Paladin took a little bit of a nerf, still going to be really strong, but they're basically going to play identically. And I think this is a consequence of the tier set design in this this season, because the tier sets, especially if you're a tank, they kind of suck. And like, so like the reason why, for example, the reason why Guardian Druid was the meta tank in Mythic Plus in season 2 of Dragonflight, they got a little bit of a rework, but also their tier set was just like crazy broken. It was just like leaps and bounds better than any other tank tier set. And it made them capable of doing pulls that literally no other tank could do. That's not happening this season, right? There's no one tier set amongst the tanks that's like crazy better than any other. And importantly, none of the tier sets, at least for tanks and probably healers as well, I'm less knowledgeable DPS, but none of the tier sets are going to result in any real change in gameplay. Like you're just not going to play the game any different because of the tier set. Which makes this really interesting thing where like the game is basically going to be the same going into this new patch. I mean, there's going to be stuff to do. It's going to be exciting, but like from a balance perspective, it's basically going to be the same. So like Disc Priest is meta right now. Disc Priest got a little bit of rework that only made them better in all the situations they already excelled in. Probably going to be meta again. Paladin got a little bit of a nerf, but they're still really solid. Probably going to be meta again. The augmentation evoker is a little bit of an unknown right now because they got that nerf to Ebb and Might, but then they were like their tier set was broken and they were doing so much damage that they were still bringing more damage and survivability than any other class. But then that took a nerf last week, so I really don't know where they are right now. But things are going to play out very, very similar to last season from a balance perspective. And it's because this borrowed power that we have that exists in tier sets just aren't as impactful this time around.
Yeah. And I mean, like you were kind of touching on, the classes that did get some reworks are also looking like they're pushing their way towards the top. Thinking BM Hunter. BM Hunter is really starting to shine. Thinking Demon Hunter. I think Demon Hunter Eldrazi Reaver got a little bit of a rework, and now they're looking like they're doing very good. So
Yeah, and they nerfed Fellsguard at the same time, so it's like they
that's
want.
sad. I like I like Fellsguard. I think the Fellsguard playstyle is more boring, but I like the thought of Fellsguard more than Eldrazi.
I like it.
But
I don't like. I really don't like the idea that your biggest defensive becomes an offensive, and then it's less of juggling the game and more of like, I feel like if I want to do decent damage, I have to burn my defensive on cooldown. It feels weird to me.
The one thing that I do want to say though is all of this is still subject to change. Like,
oh yeah,
we're
certainly.
a week out from everything releasing, 2 weeks out from the season releasing. Like, it doesn't really matter what things look like now. It doesn't matter what things look like next week. It matters what things look like when the patch releases, or honestly, a couple weeks after the patch releases, because that's when they're going to ultimately like put a halt to their tuning, start looking at season 3. So everything we're talking about right now really just doesn't mean anything, doesn't hold water. So if your class isn't looking great right now, your spec isn't looking great, still hold out hope. There's still hope for you. I
Yeah.
promise.
Also,
Unless you're feral.
Also, let's just like take a step back here. Poor feral druids. Let's just take a step back here. Everyone, when thinking about like meta and specs and things like that, should like go, what am I doing in the game right now? Like look at where you are in the game right now. And if you're a Mythic Plus player and your score is under, let's say 3,200 right now, doesn't matter what the meta is. It just doesn't matter. You will be capable of doing anything and everything you want in this game. Obviously, people like to know that their class they're playing is strong, and obviously the meta does in some ways dictate how the Dungeon Finder selects people, certainly, but any class can do everything. I know we love tier lists. We love talking about which classes are meta, which is the strongest, because we're all World of Warcraft players and we're just a little bit broken. But I just think anything can do everything. Like if you're an AOTC player and a Mythic Plus enjoyer, not a hardcore Mythic Plus person, you can play any class and achieve anything you want.
100%. And that's going to be the story for every season ever, always. So don't get too hung up on metas, and continue to play the game that you enjoy and not the game you feel like you have to play, because then you'll no longer enjoy it. All right, Scott. Anything else for Mythic Plus?
I don't think so. I'm excited. I am excited. I know some people are not as positive on the season. I still think season 1 was okay. And a lot of my complaints with it had to do with just trying to learn how to tank in one of the most difficult tanking seasons of all time. And I am a big fan of every change they've made, and I think season 2 is going to be a lot of fun. So I'm looking forward to it.
I think my biggest complaint from season 1, and this is the last thing I'll say on Mythic Plus before we move on, but my biggest complaint from season 1 was definitely the changes that they made to the gearing process. Just made shit like not as fun for me. Like, having an extra 2 levels on Myth Track gear, not as fun for me. Having the ability to just gear up to like plus 11 gear through delves and not have to play with anybody wasn't as fun for me. Having to get 90 fucking crests to make your stupid crafting item wasn't as fun for me. So like, I'm glad that they reverted and addressed a lot of these things. We'll see how it is going forward. I still think they need to do away with Myth Track gear, but hey, to each their own.
We will see. We will see. I think more changes are coming. Maybe not this season, but in the future.
Yeah, I want to say midnight, but also they've made some sweeping changes going into season 2. So who knows? It could be going into season 3. They do the big changes.
I think it largely depends on how the season goes, right? I think Mythic Plus brings a lot of, so like we there's been a lot of talk, and I was listening to another WoW podcast today, talking about like the seasonal nature of World of Warcraft, right? Like WoW has become a seasonal game, and like many other seasonal games out there, you have the new season big push at the beginning, and that tapers off as you go, and then interest kind of dies out, and then the new season comes out, and it's very cyclical. The thing about Mythic Plus is it always is kind of like, for many people, the thing that keeps people subscribed to the game long term. So like, yes, the raid to me is very cyclical. You know, you prog the raid, then you kill the raid, and then you do farm for a while, but you're pretty much done with prog at that point, and you kind of lose interest in that until the next season comes around. But for me, at least, Mythic Plus has always been something that like I like doing through. Like I'm still playing the game right now. I don't play it as much as I played at the beginning of the season, and I won't be, and I will be playing a lot more in a couple weeks from now than I am right now. But I still log on and do a few keys, and I like doing that, and that carries you through things. So I wonder, as they look at this cyclical seasonal model and look at Mythic Plus as kind of the thing that's bolstering the continued subscription plan, if they're just going to start to realize that they need this thing to be healthy for the game to be healthy. It seems like they're acknowledging that, right? Like they made a lot of changes going into War Within. They made a lot of changes going into the season. They are continuing to tinker with Mythic Plus and overhaul it and change it at a level where it seems like just think of how many changes has the raid system gone under since Dragonflight versus Mythic Plus, right? Like
The renown track.
Yeah, basically, yeah. I mean, but that's especially since they moved the Dinars from the renown track. Really, the renown track is just a cosmetic way of doing something they had already been doing elsewhere. It's just a new way of organizing it. But like, I mean, the very rare items in Raid was since Dragonflight, and I guess like what am I thinking of? What did they change? Well, I had something on the tip of my tongue and I lost it.
There was the ramping damage increase that you got in season 1.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. But that was always like returning to an old idea.
Yeah.
Wasn't there changes to? Why can't I remember it? I mean, there's been changes to lockouts and stuff, right? Like, sort of.
Like, I think the biggest
doesn't Mythic become like a server-wide lockout right away now? It used to be like locked to your server for a while or something.
The only change they made was allowing you to cross realm or cross faction.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah. My point is, before I completely ruined it by confusing myself, is that like Mythic Plus has seen basically constant tinkering iteration over the last couple of seasons, where it seems like they're like, yeah, raid's good, and I mean that's another story we could talk about one day. Is raid good? I don't know. We'll see. But it seems like they recognize Mythic Plus as yes, one of the pillars of this game, and arguably one of the most the most important one. And they're going to keep trying to get it right. So
everything in the kitchen sink and pick out the bits that don't work. I mean, I feel like that's kind of what they're doing right now, and it's worked so far. So.
And it's going to make for a bumpy ride, right? Like season 1 was bumpy because they completely threw out their affix system. They completely changed how everything worked, and they're making some mistakes, and it's rough. It seems like, I mean, maybe the War Within ends up being like the kitchen sink Mythic Plus expansion, and then by the time we get to midnight, it's like, okay, here's all the stuff that's stuck to the wall, and it's all the tastiest stuff. Let's go.
Yeah. All right, Scott. Heirlooms.
Stupid.
I really don't know what to say about this, other than I was reading through this article and there were like complaints from players saying like heirlooms are outdated. There's no point in even using them anymore. Yeah, like you alluded to, you don't get an XP increase really from wearing heirlooms anymore. Probably if you have heirlooms, you have almost all of them now because you can buy them from like 5 or 6 different currencies at this point, it feels like. And yeah, I mean, like the set bonuses, I guess, are cool if you're leveling in an open world scenario. But what the biggest problem, and this is a problem heirlooms have always had, right? You wear this set of gear until you reach a point at which it does not level up with you anymore. And now you're at that point and you've crossed this threshold. You've gained maybe another level after you hit it. And that gear is so astronomically bad comparatively to what you could be wearing that you might as well just not be wearing armor. And it is rough. And I think that in and of itself is a problem. But also, what do heirlooms even do anymore? They
Nothing.
give you like an explosion when you level up. And like, That's it.
Yeah,
Extra rested XP, I think, too.
sure. Yes. Let me explain this experience to you as a person that returned to this game in Shadowlands and had not witnessed any any of the changes in heirlooms until I came back. So like when I left the game, here's what heirlooms were. They were things that gave you experience buffs when you put them on. They had the best stats and they leveled with you, and also gave you an experience buff. And I had like all of them at the time. And then I came back and I was like, okay, I'm going to play the game. I'm going to level up a character from one. I need to get all my heirlooms. Where are they? And then slowly I realized that they removed them from being things you had to trade around and was just like a menu you could just summon them from. And I was like, oh, neat. And then I looked at them and they, they didn't have my experience buff on them anymore. And I was like, huh. And also, they all stopped having their bonuses at level 30. And I was like, huh, okay. And then I was like, oh, I see. You have to level up the heirloom now. Okay, well let me go see what it takes to do that. And like I went to some vendor in Ironforge and it was like 15,000 gold and I was like, fuck you. And then that's the end of my experience with the heirloom system. I have not touched them or cared about them since.
Dude, so okay, here's the real question. Like, we're about to talk about heirlooms, or are talking about heirlooms, and how they might need an overhaul. But like, let's just get down to brass tacks, Scott. Should heirlooms just be removed?
Yes. I mean, it's probably not even worth the effort it would take to press the delete button on them because it doesn't matter. Like, but it's irrelevant now. I mean, it just is. Like, the leveling in this game has by design become so quick and easy that you don't really need any help doing it. Like, you just don't. Like, you can either dungeon run and then you'll probably get plenty of gear through that. But even if you don't, like the way scaling works in the dungeons, like even if you have no gear, you're gonna do fine.
Yeah, the other thing that I was gonna say too with heirlooms is I feel like they're like a nostalgic factor thing at this
Yeah,
point.
yeah.
People who have them, like, they were originally modeled after stuff that brought nostalgia to people.
Mm-hmm.
The plate shoulders are very iconic. Everybody knows what they look like. The swords being modeled after Dalrens, like all of that stuff, people understood. Um, and so I think keeping them around is a good idea. That being said, in a world at which we have at the end of every season this turbulent time waste thing where they have 6 weeks of time walking or whatever the hell it is, and you get like ramping XP every time you level up, like the more and more time walking you do, the more and more experience you get, and then throw out the fact that you can jump on and get the Darkmoon Fair XP buff. Uh, yeah, I don't think they're needed anymore. I don't think they should be removed. At the very least, keep them in as a cosmetic. But I don't. This article made it sound like these need overhauled. I think that's just incorrect. I think they just need to be forgotten about. I mean, they already have been, right? Just leave them to the wayside, and then new players who come in won't know what heirlooms are, and I don't necessarily think they'll be worse off for that.
Well, a new player doesn't need to know what heirlooms are. That there was never designed for the new player experience. The point of heirlooms was a way of making it easier to level your alts,
Right.
essentially.
Yep.
And leveling alts is already so easy; they are irrelevant. Yeah, I mean, I just don't think the system needs any kind of changing because I don't think the system matters. I feel like any development time spent on trying to figure out the system would be better spent literally anywhere else.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, it's outdated, it's silly, it's stupid, but it's also just not part of the game anymore. Like you and I leveled in Wrath of the Lich King in preparation for Cataclysm because we were excited to play in Cataclysm Classic, and like using heirlooms, like you felt the difference. Like I remember
Yep.
it was you, me, and one of our friends, and he didn't have heirlooms and we did, and we were quickly like, oh shit, we're gonna have to take these things off or we're just gonna leave
Mm-hmm.
them in the dust. And like that was the game that these were designed for, is that experience, because it does, like leveling was a long slow process, and like yeah, on your alts you really don't want to have the same lengthy journey again. You want it to go a little bit faster. They've already developed new systems for this in the game, by the way. Like the just general idea, the warband experience bonus exists
Yep.
in the game now. Like I think it's only from 70 to 80, right? But it's just a built-in, no equipment required reward for your alts when your main has does dumb. And so like yeah, it's just I agree with you. I don't think they need to be removed. There's lots of systems in this game that are just dead systems that still exist because why remove them? If people want to tinker with them, fine. If they want to get them for transmog, it's probably the easiest way to get in certain transmogs. But yeah, I don't think this system needs to be spent a minute on.
The other thing that I wanted to talk about in like tandem with this isn't necessarily related to heirlooms at all, but rather the whole turbulent timeways event that they've been doing every season now.
Mm-hmm.
I
Well, do
think
they
that
do it every season?
it feels like it's been every
I'm not.
season.
Yeah, you could be right. I don't know.
But it almost feels like people enjoy this. People use this as a time to level. What it really reminds me of is like back in the day before there were two different RuneScapes, you would get like double XP weekends, or you would get double XP weekends on like Call of Duty or some shit like that. And it
Mm-hmm.
almost like reminds me of that. Um, but I also wonder like how how sustainable is it for them to keep doing this? Like at some point, people are going to be like, "Oh, it's time walking again. I got all my things leveled. What are we going to do? This is just a waste of my time." So I don't know. I think it's a good thing. It's working out for now, but I feel like Blizzard does kind of get themselves in this rut sometimes where they're like, "Okay, we're doing this thing. It's working," and then they just don't ever look back.
it. I mean, I'm very conflicted about this because on the one hand, I completely agree that it's it's a little bit silly, and I think they just need to at some point make up their mind about like what they want leveling in this game to be in
Hmm.
2025 and beyond. Because like, yeah, I mean, even the War Within leveling, like we talked about this when the expansion came out, right? Even the 70 to 80 leveling experience was absurdly quick, especially for alts. Like your first alt, it's like hours, mere hours, and like as someone who likes to level alts, or someone who likes to have alts at max level and doesn't quite enjoy the leveling process, I appreciate that, right? But then
Hmm.
the RPG enjoyer in me says like, yeah, but like leveling and growing in power and like these things are like a core part of what being an RPG is, and it's also a core part of an MMORPG, and it's like the reason why classic and hardcore and all these things are very popular now and always, right? And
Yep.
so there's a part of me that's like, the part of me that just goes like, if you're going to continue this trend of leveling this way, you might as well just take levels out of the game, because like they're just speed bumps to what the real game is, like more so now than ever before. But at the same time, while still thinking that, I'm like, but don't do that actually, because I think that would ultimately be bad for the game. Um, so I don't know. I do think like it is wild to me. Like, I mean, I grew up playing these games, right? And the leveling experience was a core part of the game. But like, I don't want to level in World of Warcraft anymore. There's a reason why I'm not playing hardcore.
Yeah.
I don't want to do that. I did it in Season of Discovery for the first phase, and I was like, only getting to level 25. I was like, man, this sucks. I don't want to do this anymore. So like, it's difficult for me to make it like a judgment call on whether this is the right move or not. But yeah, man, it just seems like eventually we're gonna have to like, we're coming to like a crisis point with this stuff, where like if it's just gonna keep getting faster and faster and faster, if you're gonna have these turbulent timeways every season that just makes it like a 2 to 2.5 hour job to level a character. Like if this is going to keep happening and happening, at some point we're going to have to step back and be like, what are we doing?
Yep.
what does this all mean?
The other part about it too is like we're coming up on becoming level 120 again, and what are we going to do? We're going to reset back down to 60? Like that's another question to have. I
Mm-hmm.
don't know. I've always toyed around with the idea of them releasing an expansion in which we don't have to level, but things are just locked behind the main story quest. You go do that, and you unlock the new things for the expansion, and then maybe there's some skips or whatever for your alts. I don't know that that's a good idea. I don't know that it's a bad idea though. Like, these are the kind of things that I would like them to try, and if it's bad, don't do it again. I think we find ourselves in this game a lot, and I get why. Like, I fully understand Blizzard's commitment to things, but they do a lot of things and then they try to salvage them if they're a disaster. And I think that sometimes rather than salvage, they need to just cut it loose. They
Mm-hmm.
need to just say, it's enough. This didn't work. Move on. And the reason that they don't do that is because it took development time. Development time equals money, and they want to make sure that they kind of try their best to get a return on their
Yeah.
investment there. Um, but that being said, the game would be better without Og.
It all came full circle. Yeah. I think this maybe cuts into some of the stuff I wanted to say about our conversation on the Circe Circlet thing.
Sure, we can move into that next.
Essentially, like your idea of not having levels in expansion, I think is one that I could absolutely get behind. I will say anything like that would need, and I'm going to use a slur here, so be careful. Borrowed power. It would
Yep.
need some sort of borrowed power system in it. And look, okay, so here's the deal. I did not play the game when the game was at its worst, supposedly, with borrowed power, right? I didn't play in Legion. I didn't play in BFA. I didn't play at the beginning of Shadowlands with all the Covenant nonsense. So like I did not experience those lowest lows of borrowed power. So when this is all to say that take what I'm about to say with a grain of salt. I don't see a problem with borrowed power systems existing in this game. And I actually think if you look at something like the fact that in the patch that's about to come up, nothing essentially is really changing in anyone's gameplay is a consequence of this move away from borrowed power systems because it's become such a bad word. What I think is any borrowed power system that exists needs to have a reasonable rate of acquisition and not an absurd time sink or ridiculousness that some of the worst examples of these systems in the past have had.
Right.
That brings me to the ring, which is borrowed power essentially, right? Like this is it is a thing that you acquire that it grows over time, and you need to collect things for to get more powerful. Like that, it is definitionally, especially in the World of Warcraft universe, borrowed power, but it is incredibly quick and simple. I think they went too far with this. So like I am not a person that has time to grind. I do not like to grind over and over and over and over again. When I play the game, I want to have fun with the game. But I also think that like if it's so mind-numbingly quick and easy, it means nothing essentially. And I think that's where we're at with the ring. And so the thing I wanted to talk to you about is with things like this, it seems like they're finding ways of changing things up and making things new and exciting. And for a while they used tier sets to kind of do that. And in the past they've used borrowed power of like giving you something to progress, giving you something that changes how you play the game, that gives you something to look forward to, that is not just gear or level, that is something more and something different. And I think whether it's this expansion or next expansion, they're going to have to revisit those things, because I just do not think they can just continue to release features and be like, these are evergreen features. Like everything we put it's going to be forever. Because I mean, you asked the question last week about talents and hero talents, and like we've called this an evergreen feature. It's like, okay, what does it look like in the next expansion? What does it look like 3 or 4 expansions from now? What are you going to do? And like, I just think borrowed power is going to have to come back in some way. I think it's the only reasonable way to advance any of this at any kind of progression in the game. Like I don't think it's an accident that those systems came to be in the game in the first place. It wasn't like someone at Blizzard woke up one morning and said, oh, I'm gonna fuck with these guys today. No, they just it solved a problem that they were having um in entertainment and retention and all these things. So I
Yeah.
don't know. What do you think?
I don't think borrowed power systems are inherently bad. I think the way that they could be implemented is what's bad. I also think that tend people tend to get attached to how their character plays in an expansion and forget that that can all change in the next expansion, whether there's a borrowed power system or not influencing that.
Yeah.
All it takes is a rework.
Yeah,
And
exactly. The rate at which they've been reworking and rebalancing and redesigning talents and classes and these things, like, yeah, you never know how your class is going to change. So,
Mhm. I always want them to be looking for evergreen systems. Like, I want things that stick around. I want, if like, let's flip the script. Let's go into a world at which like covenants were the most well received thing ever, right? They're over at the end of Shadowlands.
mhm.
And now this thing that they created that was so well received is just gone. And so like I like the idea of them having evergreen systems. The problem is with that comes constant maintenance and the ability for them to have to say we need to cut this loose at some point. Cut something loose at some point.
Yeah.
So and this comes back to exactly what I was saying before. Like we need to be able to cut our losses. The cost sunk fallacy needs to end at some point with a lot of things. If they're going to start doing evergreen systems, there will come a point at which those evergreen systems are now obsolete or way too overly complicated because you can only build on something so much before only the people who grew with it understand what the fuck's going on.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they will need to cut it loose and they'll need to think of a different idea. And they're very bad at doing that. They're very
Sure.
slow at doing that.
Sure.
So that's why I think borrowed power systems kind of solve that problem for them and necessarily aren't a bad thing.
Yeah. 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 I completely agree. I mean, it's like it is so much easier to design a system that you know has a shelf life than it is to design a system that you know you're going to have to figure out how that's going to work 10 years from now, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think the problem with borrowed power from a design perspective is exactly what you're talking about, is the feel of it. And so like if covenants were like the coolest thing ever and everyone loved them, then yeah, there would always be a like, oh, I'm bummed and sad we're losing covenants. The pressure in a world of borrowed power is finding a way to developmentally one up yourself every expansion, right?
Yep.
If you're going to live in a world where each expansion is defined by a certain thing that is, when you strip it down, a borrowed power system, then you constantly have to be coming up with something good and awesome and new. And I think the thing they were struggling with is how to do that. Like I think Legion, like everyone kind of loved the weapon. I think people didn't love how they gained the artifact power, but like the conceptually having your artifact weapon, which is this awesome looking classic weapon that is big in the lore for your class, that grows with you over the course of the expansion, is such a cool, fun, neat idea. And then it's like, okay, well, the expansion's over, and it's like, fuck, how we can't just do that again. We got to do something similar to it though. And then they kind of fumbled the ball a little bit here, and it's almost as like Blizzard is like, I don't want the pressure of having to do that every expansion. Like,
Yep.
we're gonna find other ways to do new expansion features that aren't that. I think, however, that eventually, if they don't ever do stuff like that, then I feel like expansions are going to lose their unique identity.
Sure.
Because I like you look at Dragonflight, and like Dragonflight, you could essentially call like the the evergreen systems expansion. Like this was an expansion that they were consciously and verbally trying to correct the mistakes of the past and strip down the old systems and build up a new system that was evergreen. And so like that takes time. You have to do it. You have to throw all the stuff away. You have to clean your slate and then rebuild on this new design philosophy and slate. And I think that works because when people look back at Dragonflight, that's what they're going to remember. They're going to remember the new talent trees. They're going to remember this new direction of the game, this new design philosophy. That's what they're going to remember. Now let's look at the War Within, right? Are people going to remember, like, is Delves really going to be the thing when you're like, and even they've said Delves is an evergreen system, right? So it's not going to be a War Within specific thing. This is going to be another pillar of, so it is not going to be when you look back in your mind and like remember the experience of playing the War Within. I don't think you're going to be like Delves, this Delves. So like, I do think eventually, like, I think those borrowed power systems do help give the expansions an identity. And I think we're going to need to go back to that in some way at some point. Now, let me be clear here. Like, I don't have a super amount of time to play this game, and any kind of system that requires me to grind endlessly beyond the grinding I'm already doing just to fucking get gear is something I have no interest in. But I just do think that they're going to need to put something eventually in. And yeah, I mean, I think they're going to be very conscious. It's going to be under this new slate that they built in Dragonflight, this new design idea. It's going to be built with that in mind. So I think, or I hope, it's going to be much more reasonable. But I just feel like that's where we're going. Because yeah, don't tell me you're going to, like, just don't tell me you're going to have these talent trees are going to be evergreen. Like, I don't believe you. I don't believe you in 4 years I'm going to open my talents and it's just going to have built upon the system. Like, there's just no way.
Hero talents.
Yeah.
So looking at the borrowed power systems that we have gotten in the last 2 years, Scott, let's talk about the rings comparatively to each other. I think that you brought this up already. The current ring, the circlet, is a lot easier to obtain. It's a lot easier to max, and it's a lot easier to get the gems you need for it. The previous ring, which the amulet, I think it was called,
Yep.
was harder to get. Some of the things that you needed were RNG tied, and were not really alt friendly much at all. So there have been major improvements to the circlet, namely the things that I just said. Alt friendliness is far and away much better. I mean, once you go through this quest line, once you unlock flying, you get flying on all your accounts or all your characters, and you just bang, 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 rings upgraded in like an hour, maybe 2 if you're slow.
Mm-hmm.
And that's that. And then you can buy the gems you need on your main. You can send them to your alt, and it's done. You're done. You don't have to go do anything else. The previous system, you had to essentially do the acquisition part of the ring on all your characters. You had to do the acquisition part of all the gems on all your characters. You had to level it on all your characters by paying money to somebody to craft shit for you. Like, it was just inherently worse. Now, the question this brings up is everything really better with this ring? Because like you had said earlier, it almost feels insignificant at this point. It feels like a piece of gear that you need, but it's so easy to obtain, like there's no value to it. And the whole reason to go to this island is for that ring specifically. And like I said, on an alt, you spend 2 hours there at most, and then you're done. You never come back. You never have to come back. You never look back. You're just done.
Yeah. I think in an effort to make things less painful and more friendly, they've also made them essentially meaningless. I mean, and look, like, the biggest problem here for the ring is not how quickly you can acquire it. The biggest problem is that having it doesn't feel like anything. Like, it does, like, again, I will occasionally notice like this little lightning bolt shoot from my hand and go in an arc to the enemy. I was like, oh, one of my ring things just procced, I guess. But like, other than that, like, it's not a thing you notice. And like, this is the thing. Like, we already have systems in the game to improve your stats, and that's gear, right? That's leveling and gear. Like, those are already systems that exist in the game to do that. So if you're going to develop another system, like, this is the important part about borrowed power in my mind. If you're going to develop a borrowed power system that is different from our already existing system of gear acquisition and improvement and level improvement, then it should fundamentally change how it feels to play your character in some way. Not entirely, but in some way. or else why is it there, right? Like why have that advancement system if it's just going to be numbers go up? Because we already have a system for numbers go up. That's what gear is. And
Yeah.
so at the end of the day, this ring is borrowed power that is meaningless because we already have rings that make our stats go up. Those already exist. We get them. We get like, and so I'm glad it's easy to acquire and quick to acquire because I don't care about it, because it doesn't do anything for me or to me. Like, yes, I could like look in my logs or listen to Wowhead and have them tell me these are the best ones, but I don't feel any of that because I don't
Yep.
play my class differently because of that. So yeah, I mean, like it's kind of like these are like, they're kind of like dipping their toe into the borrowed power water and like afraid that they're going to burn themselves on our rage by like just putting these little gimped version of borrowed power in the game. But like it's just ultimately like both of the rings, it's ultimately nothing. Like this ring is better than the other ring, yes, because it's easier to acquire, because I don't care about either of them, and I just want it because the thing, like a borrowed power system that over time, as you acquire new things and changes how you play the game, is going to fundamentally feel exciting because you're going to feel that incremental power increase, just like you feel when your level goes up, or when you do get a new piece of gear that pushes you past a haste threshold or whatever. Like it should feel unique and different as you progress, and this one doesn't do any of those things.
I Yeah, the other thing that I do want to say about this is like this is all also like this is on display the catch 22 that game developers have to deal with too, right? Like they hear borrowed power sucks, stop doing these systems, yada yada yada, and so they stop. And then when they do need something, they need a solution, they need something, a reason for us to go to their new content. They put something in and they're like, oh, we can't really do the borrow power thing anymore, so we're gonna go do something else. And then people are pissed off because it's like, well, what is this? This is pointless. There's no reason. So like they're always going to have they're always going to lose essentially.
Yeah,
And,
yeah,
and that's the problem with game design is like you are never going to be able to appease everybody. And I I've said this before in one of our episodes and I really stand by it. You shouldn't. You should appease the people you want to play the game. You should make the game that you want to make, and the
yeah.
people who want to play it will play it. Like, you shouldn't be a game for everybody.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, you should make the design decisions that you and your heart feel like are the best ones.
Mhm.
And I think when the game and when any game gets into trouble, is when they are doing exactly that. It's when they are just like I understand that the new kind of signal for WoW post Dragonflight that Ian has kind of beat that drum about a lot is we are listening to player feedback. We are listening to players. We are listening to them tell us what kind of game and world they want to play and live in. And like that's great. You should listen, but you should also come to your own decisions and conclusions for what you, the stewards of the game, think is the best decision for the game. And sometimes you'll be wrong. And yeah, that happens. And like you said, you should be conscious and aware enough to cut your losses when you are wrong. But yeah, I mean, like I really like this game, but I do feel like they just they I feel like they're designing out of fear with a lot of
Yep.
things right now.
Mhm.
And it's like we're so big, we can't fail. There's so much riding on this game, and we don't want to piss anyone off, and so we're just going to play it safe and play it safe and play it safe. um and then eventually, like, yeah, I mean, I understand the frustration of people yelling at you like, I hate that I have to log in every day and do stuff. I hate it, I hate it, I hate it, I hate it, I hate it. And they're like, fine, we won't do that anymore. And then a year later, people are like, I just don't log in anymore because there's nothing to do. I wish there was more stuff to do. And they're just like, what? What? like like people, like, here's the thing, we're all idiots and we don't actually know what we want. We think we know what we want, but like,
Think you do, but you don't.
yeah, I mean, there was the irony of that statement is he was of course 100% wrong, but like there was a kernel of truth to the general idea of that, like, people are very good at diagnosing what they think the problem is, but not very good at understanding what the actual solution could possibly be. So like I understand the frustration, and I want them to make a game that I'm able to play, which I will support them making decisions that lessen the amount of time one has to grind or log in every day, because I cannot log in every day. But man, eventually like something's gonna break, and
Mhm.
they're gonna have to like take some chances. Like
Yeah.
even like I am so excited for player housing, man. I'm so excited for it. But like even that is like the least risky thing ever. It's like player housing in an MMO in 2025 is like, no shit. Wow. What a bold creative decision. Like it's going to be a huge hit. Of course it is, because it's like it's the thing people have been asking for 15 years. So yeah, it's I don't know. I feel like I'm coming off negative here, but like I really do enjoy the game, and I want to see it be as good as it possibly can be. And
Well,
I look at stuff
the
like the ring, and I'm like, I don't know why you're doing this. Like, stop doing this.
that's the point that I'm trying to make, though, is like things are going to ultimately push people away from the game. But if in that you are making a game that is better, like you are making the game that you want to make, and so like I think that this comes from a situation at which Blizzard has become such a large corporation now that it is hard for them to have the agility that a smaller developer would have.
Mm-hmm.
And so like when WoW first came out, right? Like they could pivot, they could do things, they could make the game that they wanted to make because they didn't have to be thinking 6 years in advance. They would think patches in advance, you
Mm-hmm.
know? And now like as we are talking, Scott, I would not be surprised if there is a dev team in California at Blizzard headquarters working on The Last Titan.
Oh, 100%.
Something about The Last Titan is being worked on right now.
100%. Yeah. No. They like I think the major features and arcs of Midnight are done. Now they've got like development to do on like the systems and the art behind it, but like the overarching planning for what that expansion is going to be has been done probably for months now, and and that team has switched to The Last Titan 100%.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean they've kind of admitted this, right? Because they admitted that by Shadowlands they already knew that the type of borrow power systems they were putting in BFA were largely unpopular. But like they knew that going into Shadowlands, but like they were too far into development at that point. Like the ship could not steer away from the iceberg in time. And it wasn't until Dragonflight that they really got to implement those changes. So
Yeah.
yeah, you're absolutely right. This takes a long, long time. And that is part of the problem, but that's an unsolvable problem. The game is so big, the expectations, the shareholders. Will someone please think of the shareholders?
The quality that goes in too. Like you can't make a game that is as responsive and snappy and pretty as World of Warcraft overnight. Like there are exceptions to the rule, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's always exceptions. But to get the amount of polish that Blizzard tends to put into this game, it isn't something that you can do quickly. And it is so many different people working together. Yeah, the ship doesn't steer very quickly. You hit the nail on the head perfectly
Mm-hmm.
there. All of that to say, though, Scott, maybe we'll see borrowed powers at the end of this World Soul Saga. I have a feeling we're going to see very muted things up until the end of the World Soul Saga because they've already got their design philosophy ironed out and they're already starting to work on the Last Titan, if I had to guess. So
I would think it would be really cool to have like exactly what you said, where like they announce, "Hey, in the Last Titan, we're not doing any more levels, and like you're going to remain level 90." I guess it would be, assuming Midnight really ups it by another 10. Because like that kind of solves the problem with the talent tree, right? Because with the talent tree, you're like, okay, if you're not going to give me any more talent points, because obviously you can't give me any more talent points, because that would completely like the problem that the current talent trees have right now is that you can get basically everything you want, and every character is like a god that can just survive, and and that's why the game has to like try really hard to kill you now, because everyone is so fucking survivable and has a billion kicks and stops, and that's why there has to be a billion things to kick and stop. Yada yada yada. You know this, but like, so we can't give more talent points because that would break everything. We don't want to just keep the trees growing down, because we already did that in the classic version of our game and found out very quickly that becomes ridiculous and unwieldy. So what are we going to do? And it's like, oh, well, we could just not advance levels, and then we don't have to advance talents.
Hmm.
I think that does kind of sort of break a core system of how the game works, in that just like by the expansion is you level up to 80, right? And then your stats suck, and then you get really good stats relatively the first season, and then like by the end of the expansion, your stats for a level 80 character are like fucking awesome. And
Yep.
then the act of leveling, just in the internal workings of the game, kind of because of the expectations for the amount of haste gives, like yada yada, all the underworkings of the stuff, it fixes itself as you level up to the next set of levels, right? And so you start at level 90 fresh. So if they were to say, okay, no levels, they would have to have some way of kind of centering that, or everyone's going to show up to like the first raid with 50% haste, and it's just going to be ridiculous. So
Yeah.
they would have to find a solution for that, but that's not an insurmountable problem, I don't think.
Yeah. I don't know. I guess we'll see what happens. Because like they could do gear switches, whatever. I just want to know what's going to happen in the Last Titan. Like at the end of this World Soul Saga, like what is the game going to look like? And I think that that's a discussion that you and I could spend an entire episode on. Honestly, I mean, shit, we've talked about what was supposed to be just the Cersei circlet and heirlooms for 30 minutes now. Like I think that I would like to have an idea of what this game looks like. What is next for World of Warcraft after this World Soul Saga? Because as it stands right now, like we're still iterating, we still have new stuff to add, but there are very clear issues on the horizon, and
Mhm.
talents are only one of them, and for all the reasons that you just laid out. But there's more. Like there's more that we probably aren't even thinking about that will start to show their ugly heads very soon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I agree. I think maybe we can revisit this at a later date, perhaps when we know a little bit more about what that expansion is going to shape up to be. But like, I mean, they've been very clear here that like I think there was a lot of assumptions when they announced 3 expansions at once, and it's like this is going to be this World So Saga. There's a lot of people like, oh, after this, World of Warcraft's over, and of course they're terrified of that. So they're like been very clear, like no. It was still going to go on after this. This is just one story arc we're doing. We're still, don't worry, the game's not going anywhere. We're not going to do anything like that. I do think it serves as like an opportunity to kind of look at everything in the game and say, is there any place where we could like rebuild and start over here? And I'm not talking about like World of Warcraft 2. I'm just talking about like this is the end of a long ranging plot line. It is a great opportunity to like say, can we tabula rasa this thing in some way without like deleting people's characters or restoring their sense of ownership of the world? Can we build something that is WoW 2-esque? Because honestly, like my biggest disappointment in Final Fantasy 14, by the way, was they with their last expansion, Endwalker, they finished a plot line that was the entire life of the game leading up to this final moment. And I really felt, from both a story perspective and a system perspective, the new expansion, Dawn whatever's, was an opportunity of them to reset everything, to redefine how the game works, how the game plays, to really look into all these things. Because like it's just absurd in that game that it takes 1,000,000,000 hours to get to max level and be able to do all the stuff. Like it's actually just insane. Um, and I really thought they were going to take this opportunity to like start over, and like new players will experience this storyline going forward, and they could do the stuff if they wanted to. But like I thought they were going to do all these stuff, and they didn't do anything like that. They didn't do anything. They just kind of left it the same, and they just said, yeah, from a story perspective, it's like a new start, but everything else is exactly the same.
Yep.
And it would be one of the biggest disappointments in my life if World of Warcraft did the same thing, where they were just like, okay, we wrapped that story up. We're just going to carry on with the next one, and we're not going to do anything else. That would bum me out.
Yeah, I agree. I was gonna make a wow Don Terrell joke at some point in this episode, but you beat me to it. So, all right, Scott. we're gonna continue talking about this topic for the next 2 hours if we don't move on.
Okay.
So I want to spend a little bit of time talking about these Lua files that Wowhead has data mined, or is at least reporting has been data mined. And it what these are looking like is it looks like it's some sort of like a buff tracker Lua file that was added into the game. People are thinking that this is going to be like weak auras maybe added into the base UI in some sense. Um, I don't know what this all means. Like, obviously, this is all speculation. Nobody knows anything. This is just from a couple, like, I think two data mine files that were added. Like, none of this could even mean anything. Like, these could just be files that were added and will be removed in the next build. Like, we don't know. But that being said, it brings up a fun discussion to have around weak auras in the base game of World of Warcraft, because we live in a world at which weak auras solve so many problems for so many people right now. And if you were to add that into the base game, what happens to weak auras as we understand them now? Are the base game ones as good? Does this break weak auras as we know it? How are private auras handled? What about, you know, I don't know. It brings up a million questions. Like, there were so many things going through my head at like what happens if this gets implemented, that like now I can only think of like three of them, but I'm not kidding you. I was just sitting there over and over and over again, like, okay, well, that's going to break. Okay, what's going to happen here? So, what's your initial take on this, Scott? And is this something you would maybe want to see added?
I think any chance at improving the customizability and information available via the basic user interface is a good thing. It seems like what we're talking about here is specific to kind of the cooldown and buff tracking that exists in weak auras and Omni CD right now, and I just think that's a good idea. Um,
Mhm.
because like, yeah, I mean, we have friends that play this game without using really any weak auras, and then it's you and me who's like obsessed with them and needs our UI to be perfect and everything to be in the center of the screen where we want it and have all the information possible. And like, I have a lot of respect for our friends that can play the game without any of this stuff, but I don't know how they do it. And you know, we've talked about various times like the problems with having a user interface via add-ons that is so cumbersome to update. Like we don't play on PTR solely for the reason that I don't want to have to deal with the headache of getting shit working.
Nope.
So my character looks like what I'm used to seeing when I play my character. And as much of that as you can put into the base UI, I completely support. Now, I mean, some of the stuff is always going to be like better via the flexibility and time an external developer could have to figure stuff out and do. So like, I just don't think even if you have the stuff in the game, I don't think weak auras are ever going to fully go away. But I do like, one thing that article mentioned is it was talking about interviews with Ian in the past about like, hey, when you press a button, like a tank presses a defensive, it should be on like in the middle of their screen how long they have the defensive for. You should have to look up in this tiny buff bar at the top right hand of the screen. It should be in the middle of their screen and it should have a timer on it. And that's what everyone does with weak auras. And if a priest uses like pain suppression on me, that should be there too. I should
Yeah.
know. And I could see right in the middle of my screen. And like the base UI does not do that. It just doesn't. And it should. It absolutely should. Because
I,
it's so necessary to playing the game now.
I want to talk about the buff bar a little bit, Scott. I think that the buff bar has become so convoluted at this point with the amount of things that you have on your character that, like, even if we were to leave the game as it is now, there's talks that we should have about what we could do about the buff bar. Like, I don't know if it means like there's just a raid buffs buff and you mouse over it to see what all raid buffs you have. Like, anything to consolidate information in that space right now, I think would be a good thing. I don't know how you do it, but
Well,
we need to have that conversation.
this is a symptom of kind of what the game has become though, which is that like we have so many talent points and so many talents that like everything modifies everything. And so at any point we have all these buffs on us, because like it's not enough to just renewing mist. Renewing mist has to like modify and change 20 different things, and each thing has a buff to track it. And it's like, it just becomes absurd noise. Like, I think that's a symptom of like the design of the game right now, which is that like an ability by itself hits like a wet noodle, but like you combine it with 20 other things and it becomes core to your, and that's your rotation, is maintaining those buffs and stuff like that, has just become for most of the classes in the game just what the game is. So I think that's kind of a symptom of that. I mean, that's kind of a conversation for another day, because I don't know if we want to tackle the fundamental World of Warcraft combat design philosophy right now, but I agree with you. Like, buff tracking is a mess. Like, there's like, so I'm have decided I'm playing Mistweaver in the new season, right? So I pretty much know how to play Mistweaver very well, but I'm also learning Windwalker, just in case like there's another healer around and we need some damage. I never really played Windwalker, so I just like hopped on it and was just like hitting a dummy trying to learn stuff. And like, even with my weak auras, there's like shit popping up on my screen, and I'm like, I don't know what this does. What does this purple paw mean? And I'm like trying to look at my buff bar to like find what that corresponds to and highlight over it so I can figure out what the fuck it means. And I just like couldn't. I just couldn't, because like the buff, it's, you know, it's like, because things are constantly falling off, so it's constantly going and shrinking. So you land on one thing, but then it moves, and so you lose. It's fucking impossible. And I don't know how to make that better, but that's definitely a problem.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest thing that needs to be solved as far as like the default UI right now. Okay, the other elephant in the room around this, Scott, is another thing that I wanted to talk about. So, like, buff bar aside, that needs to be addressed just inherently, whether they do this or not. And then on top of that, you know, externals, understanding like tracking things that matter for your group, whether that's you opt in to track those things, but just having the ability to do that is something that needs to be in the game as well, I think, because, you know, right now we do that with Omni CD. And it works. Like, obviously it works. But if you can have that in the base game, that would be a good thing.
Yeah.
The other big elephant in the room with this potentially being introduced into the game is private auras. Like, you don't necessarily need private auras if you're already controlling what a weak aura can and can't see. And so it calls into question if WoW were to implement weak auras, how customizable would they actually be? Would you still be able to write your own Lua code and make your own weak aura?
Oh, so you're saying, okay, so your argument is, if they introduce their own version of weak auras in the base UI, would they then turn off the functionality that allows weak auras to exist?
Right.
That's interesting.
Because they didn't do that with the UI. And my argument would be you shouldn't do that anyways. Like, if an add-on works now, the add-on should work. And if people don't want to use it, they don't have to use it. Just like people who don't use the UI add-ons now.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with that. I mean, I think they should, and they've said they're going to do this, kind of control and stop certain weak aura functionality that has become too powerful. I think they should constantly be monitoring that and cutting off that functionality to track that stuff whenever possible. I think private auras have had mixed success, but I don't think that's conceptually a problem with private auras. I think it's like what mechanics they've chosen to make private auras and haven't. So yeah, I mean, I hope they don't. Like, yeah, I am for adding this functionality to the base UI. I will immediately turn against that opinion if they say, okay, we did it. We've got, you know, Blizzard auras, weak auras is now disabled and will no longer function in our game. I would immediately be against the implementation of this, because yeah, I don't think they should take anything away that exists right now. The hope is you make something good enough that it like, you can still use that add-on, but it now becomes superfluous. Like,
yeah,
there are some add-ons that like I used to make my UI look a certain way that I really don't need to use anymore with the new UI. And I think that should be the goal.
Can I just say, like, Weak Auras is probably the most powerful add-on ever to exist ever.
Yes.
But if Blizzard was going to introduce anything into the game and base UI that they haven't done yet, my vote would be for Opie. Opie needs to be in base Blizzard UI.
I love
in my
Opie. I can't
opinion.
believe some people don't use Opie. It's so good.
Like the ability to map one key press to infinitely amounts of things because you
Yeah.
can just move your mouse while pressing a key
And
is
I
like
and I would never
insane.
use it. Like some people, like I see use it in combat sometimes, and I'm like, no, I can't do that.
Mhm.
I use it strictly for stuff that like all my consumables are on an Opie menu that I can just grab. Like all my portals and my Hearthstone are on an Opie menu, and
Yep.
it's just there. Yeah, I love it. I love it so much.
That would be what I petition Blizzard to add next, personally. But I don't know, Scott. I don't have anything to add for the weak aura stuff. Like my speculations are thrown out there, my hesitations are thrown out there. If all it is literally adding the functionality of Omni CD, then hell yeah, add it into the game. Let us get rid of one add-on and have it be in the base game so that even people who don't understand add-ons have the ability to interact with this, and maybe they'll realize how beneficial it could be for them. Like
Mm-hmm.
100% in agreement with that. But if it's supposed to be a replacement for weak auras and then weak auras goes away, absolutely not. Let's not even have this conversation, to be
Yeah,
honest with you.
yeah. I mean,
Uh,
what is that thing called? That's like the personal resource display,
yeah.
which is their like attempt at making something that echoes weak auras and that like it puts stuff directly under your character
Yep.
information that you need. I think that's a really good attempt at something that is bad. Like, do you know anyone that uses that thing? I don't use it. I don't like.
So I don't personally use it, and the reason that I don't use it is because there are buffs that they just inherently don't track.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
don't know if it's because they don't think people need to track them or what. But like for example, for Prop Paladin, I had to make weak auras to track specific things like the tier set, or specific things like when you walk yourself, you get some armor and shit like that. And those would not be in the personal resource display because those are like talents you take or they're specific to the tier set. And they could be added, they could easily be added.
Mhm.
But in general, I think that they give you the information that you need to play your class, but not the information that you need to like understand exactly what's going on. They give you the absolute bare minimum. And
Mhm.
so I think that they need to expound upon that a little bit if they want that to be their pseudo solution.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the game's so fucking complicated these days. And so like there's just so many things you have to track and
Hmm.
like it I just can't imagine tracking them without the use of a weak aura. Like I just
Yeah.
can't.
The biggest thing is if you have like 500 million buffs to maintain. Like I don't understand how like resto druids even play the game anymore without weak auras, honestly.
Yeah, like the default UI for tracking HOTS and just tracking buffs on other players is dog shit because it just like it shows 3 and other stuff will just overwrite it. Like if you have 3, it'll just show the 3 most recent. So like how the hell you know who your life bloom's on? I it's insane. Absolutely insane.
Right.
You can't do it. You just can't do it.
But maybe that's what they're trying to add with this buff tracker Lua file add-on
I
replacement
hope
thing. I
so.
don't know.
I hope so.
All right. Well, Scott, I think we're about at time. So I don't know how we made an hour and a half podcast out of these 4 topics, but hey, I'll
Well,
take it.
we complained a lot, and see when you complain a lot, time goes by.
We did complain a lot. But guys, I want to know, what are you guys doing to prepare for the new season and the new raid and the new content? All of that is going to be coming out in just under a week after you guys are hearing this. Well, raid season will come out in 2 weeks, but all the new content's coming. What are you doing to prepare? Are you excited? How are the vibes going into the next season? So as always, guys, if you want to toss us a comment and answer that question, you can contact us at yellingintothevoidwow@gmail.com. YouTube is at Yelling Into the Void Wow. Twitter is at Into the Void Wow. And I created us a blue sky when I was posting our last episode. So that is at Into the Void Wow on Blue Sky as well. So all of those places, feel free to answer this question.
And of course, if you are not already subscribed, we encourage you to do so to make sure you never miss a single solitary episode. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and pretty much anywhere else in the world that podcasts exist. Guys, season 2, it's basically here. We're excited. We're going to be hitting it hard. I'm a healer again. I know how to do that, so hopefully I'll have more luck and keys, and we're going to have a great time. So hope you tune in and go on the journey with us.
Unfortunately, I'm taking this season and I don't know how to do that. So, but also, guys, please consider liking, subscribing, and commenting on the YouTube video. All of that helps us get more exposure, introduces us to new people, and if you enjoy what we're doing here, it goes a long way. So, we appreciate it. But until next week, guys, we'll just be over here yelling into the void.